This is a quick edit of some video I recorded last month. It's nothing special, but it's better than just sitting on the video forever and forgetting about it. But first, a word from my sponsor, who isn't the maker of fibre reinforced tape, but really should be, because all of my models depend on it. No, what I really wanted to say was a quick note about hover height and call an unspoken truth about my models. This is my most recent twin motor design. It's the kind of revised version of the one from the build log. Now, it looks great with this big air gap, but you ask me how do I do it? You need a big, light model with a lot of power. And that also means it can't cope with wind, and if you run it at full power all the time, very, very short battery life. And that's why when I've had this series of models out, it's always been a calm or very nearly calm day, and I rarely found myself even using maximum lift power. It was very often too much, and again, too short of a runtime to really be useful, I'd say. So the model in this video is a single motor craft, which is much heavier for its size and not quite as high power to weight, and that means you don't get that massive air gap, but you do have a model that can tolerate a bit of wind and has a much more useful runtime. I've got some testing video of a previous version of this model. I'll put it up on screen. And just note the air gap there isn't massive, but it's certainly enough to be useful. Now, where I'm going with this is that the video we've got here, this model is about the same size with the same motor, battery, propeller, but the hover height almost looks like it's halved. And I think this is about the only time that an updated, better design has actually lost hover height versus the previous ones. Certainly the earlier twin motor craft were quite a bit worse than what I'm currently managing, but I do have an explanation. First thing is that it's very easy to add weight, and the single motor craft originally had a bit of a better hover height, but between various modifications, repairs, additions, 3D printed parts that could have been done a bit lighter thinking about it, the weight's creeped up just a bit. The second problem is that even though it's using the same battery, well, I got these batteries in 2015, 3S 5Ah, and I thought, they're getting on a little bit. They're, a few years old? Looked at the calendar, 2015 was 8 years ago. Now, they're not puffed because they've been kept cool at storage charge, but they're definitely past their best. I can tell just from the voltage sag under load. This model only draws 35 amps, which is 7C, and they're dropping to 3.5 a cell under that load. That's definitely a sign of a tired old battery. And I also discovered after pulling them out of storage that the connectors had corroded, so all this is to say I had a model that was heavier than it really should have been, and was also less powerful than it should have been, so predictably hover height was a little bit disappointing, but usable. So if you think possibly my designs have gone backwards, in a sense with this one they have, but it's all solvable problems. I've already got plans for new batteries and a newer, lighter version of this. But that's enough rambling, let's just get on with the video. Initially my CG was slightly off, a little bit too far back. It's quite noticeable in the turns, the front comes up, back corner digs in. Not disastrous, but noticeable. I don't really have much commentary in me, so here it is just sliding about. It's definitely picking up a little bit of ram pressure as it starts to move, a little bit more hover height. And it can shrug off the odd impact. Now, maybe with more hover height I might have cleared that or just skimmed it, but it's very easy to build a model which is fine in a gentle garden run but falls apart under what I'd call real world, quite rough conditions. This thing shrugged it off no problem. I've got some onboard footage which gives a quite an interesting perspective being so low down. Again, not much to say, but if you're wondering why I've muted the audio, well, this is what it sounds like. If you're really determined, just record that noise and play it back on a loop for the rest of this, but that's usually why I have audio off on these things. CEG is slightly better here, and I'm getting more of a feel for the handling of it now. I mean, this is the first. Well, I've had this thing out before in the days of summer. This is the first ever time down the beach. For this particular iteration, anyway. Again, here's some previous beach testing video. I took it a little bit over to the much kind of looser sand dunes. I'll be back over there shortly. But again, just getting a bit more comfortable with the controls and handling on it. I got a burst of sunlight at the exact time I made it over to the sand, which looked really good. Quite spectacular both in person and on video. Although it did turn into a bit of a sandblast and was rather painful if you got it on your skin and started to erode the foam inside, so I'll maybe limit it in future. Again, with the lower hover heights, not fully clearing the sand and little obstacles the way I would have liked. Certainly the previous version of this and other designs would be really floating over the sand rather than just skimming it, but it works. And I've got some obligatory slow motion and some onboard video, which I'll just put up without any real commentary because there's not much to say. If you paid attention in the opening shot, you may have noticed that it sprouted a pair of outboard wings, somewhat like a certain Bixel design, which I may be very fond of if you've followed this channel for a long time. I had no expectations of this thing actually flying, and sometimes when I say that I cut to a shot revealing that it actually did. Not this time. It's too heavy of a model with not enough direct thrust. Your forward propulsion's coming off the rear flaps, not directly from the propeller. Although I was somewhat curious as to what would happen if I kind of ramped it off a dune and basically forced it into the air. Would it be stable or would it just drop like a brick? But that's maybe a test for another time. But certainly I wanted to see, was I picking up any ground effect lift on those outboard wings? And yeah, I think I was. I just noticing a little bit more lift and less tendency to kind of pitch up. I did notice this roll instability, which it looks somewhat like Dutch roll in fixed wing, where it's not pure rolling motion. I seem to detect a little bit of yaw hunting going on there. I think it maybe needs more vertical stabiliser area. The little orange vertical rudder was intended for turning at high speed, and that rather than opening and closing the flaps, just leave the flaps as they are and just nudge the course with the rudder. Didn't seem to work very well, but I think it was just lacking authority. But yeah, I did get that annoying roll-yaw oscillation. It wasn't disastrous, but it was there. Just a small point. If you're wondering why the peripheral jet uses a flexible plastic, this is why. I tried a model with like a rigid outer, okay, it's not a skirt, but I tend to call it a skirt, it's the outside peripheral jet flap, whatever you want to call it. And it got caught on the ground and basically ripped the entire sidewall off, so yeah, you really want something rigid enough to form a peripheral jet but can easily bend if it gets snagged, as it did there.